Hello, my name is Joshua Gilliland, one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me to discuss Daredevil Born Again, Episode 3 is retired Judge Matthew Sciarrino, Gabby Martin, and Chris Butler. All of us have practiced law, and we are here to talk about a trial episode of Daredevil. Going in the order I just described, for sake of not everyone talking at once, Judge Sciarrino, how are you tonight?
I am very well, thank you.
Excellent. Gabby, how are you?
I'm doing excellent. I am loving Daredevil Born Again so far. It's been fantastic.
And Chris, how are you? And what do you think of
I'm
Daredevil?
doing a lot better than spoiler warning, White Tiger at the end of the episode.
Yeah,
Doing a lot
yeah.
better than that.
Spoilers. We're going to be talking lots about this. So if you haven't watched the episode yet, please go and watch the episode, then come back. You can listen to our voices then. So this is a trial episode. We have courtroom scenes and a trial that happens, I think, fairly quickly after the arrest. So the right to a speedy trial is put to good measure here. Your Honor, did that seem realistic to you? I mean, superheroes aside.
It certainly fits within Daredevil in that the trials do come about really, really fast after arraignment. It's generally within days. That certainly does not happen in real life. A capital case, a murder case, a case involving a police officer probably would not go to trial for about a year after arraignment, just as a general guess.
But they have that super fast time travel and things,
Yeah,
they
as a
go from.
defense attorney, you probably want to get some discovery before you
Mm.
actually go to trial.
Yeah, a lot of us are old-fashioned that way, but not every TV show has that. So let's talk about the charges that White Tiger gets accused and tried for. And Your Honor, you helped outline, there are multiple charges here, and somebody on TikTok asked, like, hey, can you have multiple charges? And the answer is yes. So why, well, first question, why have multiple charges?
You generally, if you're a prosecutor, you're going to charge any of the particular crimes for which the elements are met, because depending on how the proof comes out in trial, before the case is submitted to the jury, some of the charges might be dropped. Sometimes lesser included offenses at the request of defense counsel might be added into the deliberations that the jury is going to actually consider. But in case the proof at trial comes out a little bit differently, and additionally, you might also prove various crimes, and for each of the crimes for which someone is convicted in, they can be sentenced. Now, if the crimes themselves are all out of one act, then those sentences would be running at the same time, what we call concurrently. If they're different acts, even if the same course or scheme, but separate acts, then the judge might sentence someone consecutively, which means they're going to serve each of those sentences one after the other. And just as another aside, as a bit of trivia, I guess, with regards to the trial. That is an actual courtroom at 100 Center Street. I recognize some of the artwork that was on the walls. One of my friends actually sits in that courtroom, and it's a really, really pretty courtroom. The thing that annoys me is that every time they show the outside of that courthouse, they are showing 60 Center Street, which is the civil Supreme Court in Manhattan. It's a much, much prettier outside. I get it, but all of the trials take place for criminal at 100 Center, which is this really kind of Gothamy Art Deco building. I happen to think it's very beautiful, but it doesn't like fit into one shot, so they always are using 60. Law and Order does the exact same thing. They show the outside 60 Center, but the courtrooms are all at 100 Center. Pet peeve of mine.
Valid. Well, so let's break down the charges. And Chris, if you could help with this, that'd be fantastic. But the defendant's charged with, starting from lowest to highest, manslaughter, murder two, murder one. And can you help walk us through those different charges?
Yeah, so this is a little different from my jurisdiction where usually murder is the more so that's the one you start off with, and manslaughter is usually the one that's like, okay, maybe you don't have all the elements. But and I don't think our manslaughter has degrees. But in New York, manslaughter in the first degree is a person they're trying to seriously injure someone. This is the first element. And the second one is they're trying to kill them. So this is greater than assault, which, is different in a criminal and civil context. So what they're trying to get here, this is like sort of the netting of how they're trying to get Hector Ayala. They're not trying to get away. There are some cases where you think it's clear that someone killed someone, but maybe the prosecution overcharged or had circumstantial evidence, which I think was really the case here. There was a lot of evidence we did not get introduced that we thought I think the four of us would think you would see in a case, but they sped through this thing like it was the Flash. Different universe, but same result. We don't talk about Quicksilver in the MCU. Murder in the second degree. Oh, wait, something that's important is in New York, manslaughter is in the first degree is a class B felony. Uh, that's going to need someone else that's in New York to explain the differences between those because we don't have that here in the Great Lakes state. Um, Murder in the second degree is a person intending to cause the death of another person, causes that death of that person or another person. And there are see, I'm trying to talk. I'm just going to read it. The defendant acted under the influence of extreme emotional disturbance for which there was a reasonable explanation or excuse. Pretty much, you're trying to have a reason out for why you killed that person or why your actions led to that person's death. Or the person being charged, the defendant, your conduct caused or you aided, unless you were under duress or deception, you caused the person to commit suicide. Or extreme recklessness, depravity. You did not care what happened to that person. This is considered a class A1 felony. Man, y'all are complicated in New York. And murder in the first degree is a person is guilty when they intend to cause the person, you intend to murder, kill the person, or you ended up killing someone else. Um, and either the intended victim was a police officer, which was the case here, and that's where they get that charge. And this is also a class A1 felony.
Yeah, the degrees confuse me too because we don't have all. It's different in California as well. So, Gabby, as the other East Coast attorney, can you help us understand the degrees for those of us that, our laws are just different?
Yeah, no, and it's funny because, I went to law school in Connecticut, registered to practice in Connecticut, and so we have a friendly competition with our friends in the great state of New York. And it's interesting in going to law school there. We always talk about the difference in the criminal system, and so I think what's interesting about, the state of New York, especially this kind of murder in the first degree, and I think to kind of tie it to current events, I think, and Judge, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this came up with the trial of Luigi Mangione of the kind of escalation to get to a first degree murder charge, right? That is specific to New York. And I think in New York, this is where you have to have that kind of elevated charge, as you guys were mentioning on last week's episode. Murder in the first degree, you're having the death of a police officer, which is one of the escalations here. The other degrees that we have, murder in the second degree, you intend to cause the death of another person. And then manslaughter, this is where, it's funny, I remember the chart from my criminal procedure, criminal law classes. And manslaughter is those charges where you're talking about, you didn't necessarily, don't have kind of that malicious intent to kill somebody, right? But you do have that intent, that criminal intent, malicious intent, to cause physical injury, and that does result in somebody's death. So what he's being acquitted of here is the jury is basically finding that he did not have any form of intent to commit any sort of either physical injury or murder, or cause the death of another person, I should say, because it was, as they found, and we know from seeing the whole thing happen, it was an accident.
So part of the I want to highlight California does have like murder in the first and murder in, the second degree, but the like class A felony, class B felony, like I don't see that as a civil litigator. And Your Honor, if you could help us, because New York code sometimes feels like it needs a decoder ring for the different felony levels.
You
That would be
know,
helpful.
with Mangione, they were federal charges, but very, very similar in that they were trying to get the escalation because I think they wanted him to be eligible for capital punishment with regards to that particular case. And initially, you have to look at with New York with capital punishment, it was only murder in the first degree for which you were eligible for the death penalty. Now, granted, the death penalty in the MCU exists, but does not actually exist in New York any longer because was struck down by our highest court. And I think the best way to look at these three charges is in light of what you stated before, why you charge the multiple counts. If the prosecutor proved to the jury that he killed him and he knew he was a cop, murder in the first degree. If the prosecution proved that he intended to murdered him, but he did not know at the time that he threw him into the train that he was a cop, that would have been murder in the second degree, which is common law murder. And then lastly, if he proved that he didn't intend to kill him, but he did intend to injure him by putting him in front of the train, and that resulted in his death, that would have been the manslaughter. And the jury acquitted him of all three charges. And the reason then that you have the A1 felonies and the B felonies, and it goes C, D, and E felonies, and then for misdemeanors, there's A and B misdemeanors. And basically, it has to do with the punishment for which you can then be sentenced. And to simplify things, for an A violent felony, which was both murder in the second and murder in the first, you would face life without possibility of parole or a sentence of 20 to 25 years, depending on other circumstances, your prior records. All of those things can escalate you from one thing to another, whether you're a predicate, a first-time felony offender, a second-time felony offender. In New York, all of those you have to take those into account as a judge when you're doing sentencing. And for a B felony, which would have been the manslaughter, if he was only convicted of that, the sentence could be from 5 to 25 years, again, depending on his prior record and other certain circumstances. So the class of the felony really comes into play with the punishment after they're convicted.
Thank you. That's very helpful for those who wonder, hey, a what? So let's jump into something that happened to us on social media that Chris jumped on with is Matt Murdock a good lawyer? Which is going to be the intro to evidence discussion that we'll have. And Chris, you want to take the first swing at this on whether or not Murdock is a good attorney?
So I know one of the sticking points that I've been asked about, and I know that I've seen circulated online, it is did Matt break attorney-client privilege when he introduced the white tiger mask and the identity into the case? And I can't say that he did. I because we know that the judge knows, we know that the prosecution knows, and while Hector admitted that he was the white tiger, that was found during the course of, I can't remember his investigator's name.
Cherry.
Cherry. Okay, I wanted to say that, but I was like, that can't be right. Cherry found it in his home, and what I also thought was really surprising, given that he was a murder suspect, you would have thought that would have been taken by the police in the course of the investigation. But, not everybody. I mean, everybody's watched enough like SVU or NCIS or CSI to, throw that in there. But yeah, at least when it comes to me, I don't think that's a violation of attorney-client privilege. Might be a little bit underhanded lawyering after he fought to keep it out. But it is character evidence, all the things that he's trying to get, the door he's trying to open with the White Tiger identity. And I I don't know if it's improper. I don't think it shows proper what's it, candor to the court. But sometimes I guess you need a lawyer to do that when that hand is stacked against you. Can't say I condone it, but I do understand it.
I would venture to say because Cherry was Murdoch's investigator, all of his work does fall under the attorney-client privilege because he is operating that way. So a discussion that Matt and Cherry would have would be privileged because he's the investigator doing that work. Now, Cherry can testify to what he's seeing in order for them to get evidence in, but I think there's an argument that Cherry's investigation could be protected. Your Honor, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, everyone that's in the law office that's a non-attorney, the attorney is ethically responsible for. So with Cherry, we have a couple of issues. We have one, the fact that he's paying off a witness with drugs. I think that can raise some ethical concerns. And I think here, in as much it was found by Cherry while he was in Matt's employ, and the uh, the White Tiger did not want this to be disclosed. I think there are some ethical issues with disclosing that. Now, granted, it worked out because it, I believe, was the only reason the White Tiger was acquitted. So I don't think that the ethical bodies would come down very, very hard on this particular case. The judge was certainly not happy. And part of that is that that judge kind of went out on out of the way to make that ruling. It was not, I'm sure, a very popular ruling with the prosecutor's office or the police department. And in as much as he kind of put his head out there to make that ruling, and then Matt Murdock did what he did, I well understand when they went back into chambers why that judge was not particularly happy with the way that that was done. So I think there are some ethical issues. Uh, I don't think that in the end Matt would get into a whole lot of trouble with it, but I think that it is something that some ethical bodies might look into.
Gabby, what are your thoughts?
I, so I kind of what we're talking about is, you can understand it, right? And as the judge said, it did ultimately work in his favor, right? But I think what struck me, and I was trying desperately to find a case that would kind of speak to it, is there's for me a difference of if this was say like a Spider-Man reveal or any kind of Flash. Obviously we're crossing universes, but Flash or whatever. But there was something about the way he described the White Tiger being connected to his cultural heritage that kind of sent up a red flag for me that it might have it seemed very similar to like Black Panther. And just it could have cultural, ethnic, religious undertones. And if perhaps by revealing that, there's something almost, protected about that in a way that's not just, oh, his identity, right? That there's something deeper there to his connection as the White Tiger. It's clearly connected to his cultural heritage, talking about the island of Puerto Rico, and there's an amulet, right? And so my thought was, again, yes, it's legal gray area whether he can or can't reveal it, right? But I think there's something deeper, that there's this kind of religious cultural violation that happens as well.
I have all kinds of problems with it. and from the duty of loyalty to the client, uh, incurring the wrath of the judge, because there could have been other ways to have brought this out. Because the issue is the confidential informant that the police were going to murder chickened out on the stand because the courtroom was full of law enforcement staring at him, people with Punisher tattoos on the neck. He's a little nervous. So I don't know if there would have been a way to have cleared the courtroom with police officers so he could have felt safe to testify, or if there's a way to effectively impeach the victim. And how do you do that? And Your Honor, if you have a thought on, was there another trial strategy that could have worked here? Would love your thoughts on this.
It also seemed like someone came into the courtroom. They really didn't show who or what, at least unless I missed it, which kind of triggered his change. It was a la like the Godfather, what or Godfather 2, while Michael Corleone was being targeted, and the informer was on the stand, and then all of a sudden Michael was sitting next to the brother of the witness, and there was that subtle message. So I don't know who came into the courtroom that might have triggered that particular thing. I think that you would have asked the judge to send away the jury. If you were Matt Murdock, send away the witness, and kind of give your offer of proof as to what you believed that this witness was going to testify, because you had a good faith basis in that, because you've discussed it with that witness, and something happened that changed his mind. And then, without anyone in the courtroom other than, of course, the defendant and the prosecutor and Matt Murdock, you could have put that witness back on the stand and asked a couple of questions to see if he was being threatened. And there is a procedure for this, where a person can be kind of forced to testify against their will, not necessarily what they're going to say. So if he was going to stick to his story that he was home, you might declare him hostile. But clearly, I think Matt realized that he wasn't going to get anywhere, and that his best course of action was to change tactics. But there is a mechanism for if this kind of thing, and this does unfortunately happen. It happened in several gang murder trials that I was involved in, where witnesses who were eyewitnesses to various things the day before their testimony, they either disappeared, they made themselves unavailable. There were times where we would have to send out detectives to arrest a witness and hold them in a hotel until it was ready for them to testify. There is procedures for all of this that still try to keep a trial fair to the defendant and for due process as well. But there are procedures for dealing with it depending on the actual events in question.
Fascinating. Why don't we get to what I love, and that's the rules of evidence, because back in law school, I spent a lot of time alone. But let's get into character evidence. And uh, there's a time you can offer it, you can't offer it, and when it could be a very bad idea. I know the judge and I are evidence nerds. Gabby, how do you feel about evidence? And can you help us understand character evidence?
You're bringing up some, like, this was always the toughest subject I had. But it's interesting because I think what you see here is really, and I'll leave it to you guys to comment on the um accuracy, the 100% accuracy, right? But it's really interesting because obviously Matt changes tactics, and revealing the white tiger is to speak to his character, right? And so evidence of a person's character is not admissible to prove that the person acted in conformity with that particular character on a particular occasion, except in certain circumstances, right? So in a criminal proceeding, it can be admissible where the evidence of that character is an essential element of a crime charge or claim. So here, you could argue that might be the case, right? That he's part of his character is that he goes around, getting into altercations with police officers, right? That he hates police officers, that and it speaks to his intent or lack thereof to harm these police officers. A defendant may offer evidence of character that is relevant to prove the defendant acted in conformity. If evidence on a particular occasion, and in a criminal proceeding, there's some other evidence of character in terms of defense, justification, or self-defense.
Chris, would you like to add anything on character evidence?
Yeah, I in especially in this context where as Gabby said, Matt is using the white tiger persona to demonstrate that Hector has this propensity to help people out because, as he says, quote, it's the right thing to do, unquote. The prosecution has the ability to rebut that introduction of character evidence. Now, they didn't show a lot of the prosecution's case on that, so I would be curious, as since the prosecution fought hard to bring this evidence in there and they obviously lost. I wonder if they were going to go for the angle of, this is not character evidence of someone that is helping for it's the right thing to do. It's someone that maybe just wants to get out there and fight, and he's not taking context of the situation into account or something to that effect. And what I also found interesting was, and maybe they didn't show this, and maybe he was alluding to this, but he brought in all these police reports from all the different officers, and then we got possibly a cameo mention of Officer Morales, quite possibly the father of Miles Morales. But in my experience, and I think this is sort of universal from what I've looked into, police reports are inadmissible hearsay. There are layers to hearsay, but at least in this context, I feel like the police officers would more than likely be available. But he's using these as character evidence that Hector Ayala is a guy that helps out because it's the right thing to do. And I don't think that would have been allowed.
So luckily we have a retired judge that can help us with this because I have, well, Your Honor, what are your thoughts on the issues that Chris has raised?
Absolute hearsay and absolutely inadmissible at the trial. And there's really no way around that issue. They would have had to have put those officers on the stand and asked them about those incidents and his reputation and what happened, because a report cannot be cross-examined. So even though, in addition to it being hearsay, you have a Crawford issue where there is an issue where the prosecutor has a right, or reverse Crawford issue, where the prosecutor has a right to cross-examine those witnesses. So those reports never would have been allowed in at any trial. The dirty cop who did testify, he testified that him and his partner were alone on the train station that night, and it seemed like the prosecutor's case and as Chris said, there wasn't much that was shown, but there's no way around, I don't think, the fact that the theme and the motive that the prosecutors seemed to be going after was that the defendant did not like cops, and that's the reason he took this cop, and he knew he was a cop, and he threw him in front of a train because he did not like cops. So as a result, the character evidence in and of itself would have been relevant and would have been allowed at trial, just not through reports. They would have to have put Spider-Man's dad on the stand.
There's, we live in an age where there are cameras every place.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you didn't try acquiring security footage from the subway seems very strange to me because that could torpedo the prosecution's case.
Not all of the New York subway system stations have cameras. It's in the high 80s to 90%. Some of them,
Okay.
and you know, this is a clear example um, of I guess maybe ethnic privilege, but the midtown stations were the first ones to get the cameras, and then as we got to the poorer neighborhoods, they were some of the last places to get the cameras. And you would think that since that's where arguably, at least that's where people argue most crime takes place, that that's where they would put a lot of the cameras. But it did not work that way. And part of that was infrastructure, in that the more newly renovated stations had the infrastructure to put the cameras, and also Staten Island and its little train system was one of the last to get cameras, and not all of those stations have cameras yet. So it is in the high 90s as far as and most of the Manhattan stations have, but some of the stations in the Bronx and in Upper New York did not have cameras yet.
I would also add they could have used that to torpedo the confidential informant's testimony that he was home all evening,
Absolutely,
because then
absolutely.
you'd be like, okay, maybe you didn't see him because the subway system didn't have cameras, but I'm sure one of the corners outside the subway station had a camera, and then you could be like, well, is this not you? Where were you going? Where were you headed from? Why were you in such a hurry? And then, permission to treat the witness as hostile, and then get that testimony in there.
Right, and the other
Yeah.
thing that on that is Matt Murdock, I think, because he assumed that he was going to be a good witness for him, didn't bother to get all of those um, cameras from the local stores, the local streets, because we would see this a lot in trials, that you would be able to piece someone's progress through the city, or from camera to camera to camera to camera, in order to show where they went from point A to point Z. And we saw that a lot. But I don't think that, that the police certainly weren't going to be getting that footage, because it didn't help their crooked case. And Matt, I don't think, went after it. I would have thought Cherry would have done a little bit more due diligence on that, but apparently, because I guess the trial happened in like 3 days, they didn't have the time to get the footage from all of the stores to show that he wasn't home, that he was on his way to the train station, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that law firm has a lot of staff that could have found all the video evidence they needed for a firm that's been in existence for 1 year. That's my sticking point. They have a lot of staff that could have helped with this case.
you could also get the cell phone information to show where the witness's cell phone was pinging. Because if it was like, oh, okay, you're going to say you were home, you're on a recess, and you get the, cell phone data and impeach him, to show like it shows this in the train station.
The one issue on that is, if a prosecutor is getting that cell phone data, he's going to get it very, very fast. If you're a defense attorney trying to get that cell phone data, it's going to take a very, very long time, and you're going to have to go through a lot of hoops to get that particular cell phone data. And it's not fair, but that is reality.
Yes, again, the 3-day trial is kind of a hang up here, because you think they would have had more time to do more due diligence. Because even if they had a month, like there's a lot of the stuff might still take 30 days for it to arrive. So frustrating. But there would have been ways to have impeached the victim, which I know sounds horrible, but if he's playing, I don't want to have my wife and kids end up dead too. Fine. Uh, but he's still not off the hook, that just because he survived being on the stand, that doesn't mean he gets to live. So, again, ending of Godfather 2 comes to mind. But let's talk about other elements of this case. With, somebody's brought up bribing the witness with drugs. I think that was, the comment about like, I can't have you drooling on the stand. I don't know if that's a bribe, as opposed to, well, medicating the guy, which doesn't make it right. But the question about can you give your best testimony today? If he's drooling, no. If he's high, also no. Your Honor, you came off mute pretty quick. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I have problems with someone from your law office giving an illegal substance to a witness. So I really don't see that as being something that should be done. Clearly, he wanted him at baseline, and to get him at baseline, he's a drug addict. The easiest way to do is to give him his drug of choice. But there are substitutes that are not as illegal as what appeared to have been given to him. But yes, I have ethical issues because he is a member of his law office, and all of those he is ultimately Matt Murdock is ultimately in charge of the ethics of that office, and giving an illegal substance I don't believe can be found to in any way be kosher under New York's rules of character and fitness.
So they lose their main witness, and Matt, after a recess, which has like time to go home and strategize in the war room, decides to cross-examine his own client and say, "Are you not the white tiger?" I have problems with this, and I'm going to be curious to hear what the others say. But my reaction to that is he didn't talk to the client before having this giant change in strategy. There was time to actually go back to the office. So this means that there was no time to talk with the client prior to putting him on the stand, no time to pass a note prior to putting him on the stand. Ambushing one's own client seems problematic. Now, there's the other issue of client confidences. I'm still not convinced Hector's identity as the White Tiger was public information, because as we see in the trial, it's not. I still don't know if the DA didn't know about it until Matt brought it up, because I don't think the police did a good job searching that apartment, if the apartment had been searched at all. Because again, it's in a box under the bed. How lazy were they that they either didn't look, or if they did look, they left it. Like that's not screaming thorough with that investigation. But it feels like he disclosed attorney-client confidences, investigation that had not arguably was privileged, and it's I think problematic. And Gabby, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, like I said, it as soon as it happened, you feel a certain way, at least I did, because again, going back to it's not just kind of revealing his identity, but there is this kind of cultural component that seemed almost like outing, and it just rubbed me the wrong way. And obviously, when he's speaking to him in the cell, it's almost like he's doing something on his own behalf for his client, right? He says, you'll be better off like not taking it up again, right? Ignoring the kind of cultural significance and or religious, ethnic kind of significance to his particular superhero identity or vigilante identity versus Matt and being Daredevil. I do think, though, going back to what we were talking about of character evidence and all of that, there is a certain strategy here, which is getting ahead of something, right? Introducing something before the prosecution has an opportunity to introduce it, right? So that you kind of control the narrative, right? So if he had, which is kind of confusing because obviously the motion to eliminate was granted and the evidence was suppressed, right? But you could make an argument that maybe he thought that the prosecution was going to try to attempt like a gotcha as he did, right? And so there is that kind of strategy in trial to kind of get ahead of the bad evidence, right? So that you control what's being said. That's one of the one of the reasons for putting your client on the stand, right? And so yeah, that is the strategy, but the reveal is, I agree with you, not 100% ethical there.
It's problematic because the lawyer's endangering the client's family as well, which is the entire reason, part of the reasons why superheroes have secret identities so their loved ones don't get taken out. I remember reading the original Marvel Civil War, and there's an exchange between Captain America, Steve Rogers, and Spider-Man after Spider-Man's reveal of how does Mary Jane like knowing that the Green Goblin or the Hobgoblin has her home address? Like, you're endangering others with that conduct. Again, Aunt May gets shot, so problematic all around. Chris, did you want to add something?
Yes, also you almost triggered something by bringing up Aunt May getting shot and then Brand New Day happening to erase all that. This made me stop reading Marvel comics for a decade. Anyway, uh a couple of things that I thought interesting is that Matt Murdock got bit by the Tony Stark bug, and what I mean by that is I feel guilty and self-righteous about something, so I need to project this on to you, Hector. Because he's like, I gave up Daredevil, and I am all the better for it, and you will be too, sort of forcing Hector into that corner. And I feel like that's for Matt, but it's also a narrative tool for us because there's nothing keeping Matt from, if he didn't want to say it in the prison, to while they're in the courthouse waiting for the judge to come in to be like, hey, I got a new strategy. And if he doesn't even want to tell him straight up, he can just be like, trust me, or just say, hey, we got to bring in your identity or you're going to die, that kind of thing. Because, like you both said, it puts his family in danger. It completely ignores the heritage portion of what the white tiger means to Hector. And I just thought that was a wild move. It worked, but it only worked for what, a day, 12 hours, after he got acquitted. And then the other thing would be, it's weird. I don't know, as a result of that, and I'm jumping ahead to the closing argument of the prosecution, where he's saying, real heroes don't hide behind masks. It's a kind of a wild thing to say post Endgame in the MCU. You've already had the Sokovia Accords, both, you had everybody fight for it. They got passed, then they got repealed. In a post-repealed Sokovia Accord world, it's wild to say that heroes don't wear masks.
Yeah, yeah. After half the population gets turned to dust and comes back, there have been two alien invasions. Turns out there's an undersea kingdom. People might be a little on the freaked out side and also comfortable with the norms of like, oh, aliens are real? Yeah, we know now. Like, I'm still upset about the price of gas. Like, they could just not like register. It might not be important anymore, or they actually might see the person as a hero because, like, oh, you stopped the giant rhino man from destroying my neighborhood. Thank you. Um, Your Honor, your thoughts.
I don't think I could have said it any better than Chris, so I'm not going to add anything to what Chris has already said, except for the fact that in this MCU universe, if it follows the comic book story that this is kind of getting its information from, the DA is appointed by the mayor, as opposed to real life, where the DA in New York is elected by the citizens of the county. So, in as much as he's appointed by the mayor and he knows the mayor's feelings against vigilantes, that could be the reason that he made the statement about the heroes don't wear masks.
Yeah, and public opinion could swing. But if this is also post Brave New World and the president turned into a Red Hulk, there might be a much lower threshold for like, yeah, okay, we call that Tuesday.
Uh,
Like they just might not. They're used to weird at this point.
There's a Red
Uh,
Hulk.
yeah,
oh, there's
that's a
another evidentiary issue.
Oh,
that I want to bring up, which probably would have been an expert witness, but in the prosecution's closing argument, he brings up, he's like, "Do you know what happens when you get hit by a train?" That is, I mean, granted, it's closing argument, and the juries are instructed to not listen to closing arguments, but having been a juror myself, I can tell you that does not happen. But they he brings up, all the things that happen to your body when you get hit by a train and how you're not dead and everything like that. He couldn't just say that off the cuff. He would need an expert witness to introduce that. And then, that brings up the, feeling of like, this is how, depraved he must have been to hit that element of I think that was murder in the second degree, had to hit that element of like he did not care what happened to this person's life because there's no getting around this and the pain and terror that the cop would have felt.
it also raises the terrifying question, how often does that happen? Because if you have that kind of knowledge about train accidents,
Un un
how
Unfortunately, people being thrown onto the tracks in New York City does happen with quite a bit of frequency. Uh,
that
and
horrifying.
the medical examiner, in as much as this was a death case, would have had to have testified. So there would have been expert testimony to establish that the victim was in fact dead, and there would have been testimony as to the trauma that the body. So although a prosecutor is actually under a much higher ethical duty in their closing arguments than a defense attorney, um, the there would have been, I think, that underlying information for that prosecutor to make those statements that they did, because there would have been no way to prove a murder case absent some of that expert testimony, at the very least, the medical examiner.
Moving ahead, so here's an issue that reasonable minds can differ on, but I'm of the mindset Matt Murdock should have told the court that the star witness police officer tried to have him executed in the confidential informant's apartment. I think that's an important fact the judge should know about. I think it's something the jury would want to know about, because if you're going to play the dirty cop card, it shows the intent of the police officer to go on a murder spree. And especially after losing the star witness, that would have been helpful, because it goes to the entire issue that these cops are dirty and that they're out there killing people, because they had no qualms about executing a defense attorney. Reasonable minds can differ. Uh, but I think that should have been brought out. And I think there's a duty to the court to do it. I think there was a duty to the client to do it as well. It does raise some sticky questions about how did they find the confidential informant, but my 2 cents. Gabby, your thoughts?
Yeah, I legally I agree with you. Story wise, I think there's probably my guess and my feeling is that Matt knows that Fisk is behind this, right? And even it was telling with the police commissioner saying, like, you're always going to be the kingpin, right? That he doesn't know kind of how deep this goes, right? Because clearly something is weird if these guys just, concoct. And it has, the whole storyline was kind of weird to me, that they concocted this story that, they were on the, they were doing police activity, right? And this guy just came up and attacked him, which is clearly not what happened, right? They were roughing up a confidential informant. Um, but it just all seems, obviously we know with the Punisher tattoos and at the end of the episode, seeing potentially the Punisher back, spoiler alert, but I think that kind of was the uh, reason for not disclosing that.
Your Honor, do you have thoughts on this?
I don't know if there was any, the misconduct was not of another attorney, so an attorney only has a ethical obligation to report other attorneys for unethical conduct. He clearly could have reported the police officer and whether or not uh, the defense of his client put a duty to disclose it because it would have helped his client's case. I think one goes more to his attorney's strategy in the particular case. So again, I don't think it was a mandatory duty to report it, but it might have it might have helped his case. It's also very possible the judge would have said that this was a collateral issue outside of the scope of this particular trial, in as much as the police officer had already testified. And, so it could have raised a couple of issues where he probably wouldn't have been able to pursue that line of inquiry anyway at that particular point. I think once his witness kind of turned on him, and if they had explored that more, and the reasons for his client changing his story, that then might have been the 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 time to raise that particular issue. But it doesn't seem that it ever went that far for whatever reasons, and we didn't particularly see that. So I don't think there was an absolute duty. You can certainly make the case that he should have.
Which, yeah, there's a difference between the ethical duty to report wrong conduct versus the duty to the client for putting on the best case possible. And if the reason Matt didn't want to do that was it could have disclosed, oh, I have a radar-like sense and I'm really good at fighting, that could also, again, then the duty of loyalty isn't to the client, it's to the lawyer's self-interest instead. In this case, not getting outed as Daredevil. Chris, any thoughts on that issue?
Um, I don't think I have anything to add about whether there's a duty. I think Gabby and Judge Serino covered that quite well. But on the intimidation of a witness issue, I'd also throw in harassment of counsel, given that the police officer that was the star witness for the prosecution then pulled over, the investigator of the defense. And then you would have to bring him on the stand and be like, well, why did you do that? Why were you there? That's, to me, I don't know where his, precinct's boundaries are, but seemingly it seemed like it was well outside that. But you bring that up, and then you can ask him questions like, have you seen or have you been to the confidential informant's home? Like, there's a rabbit hole. You say that, this is just continued harassment because I'm representing the confident, or I'm representing Hector Ayala, and the confidential informant's key to my case. I think there was a lot they could have explored there, but they went through this pace. I thought this trial would be at least 2 episodes.
Yes, but sometimes the viewing public isn't into that. So,
Fair.
uh,
As
again,
as to jurisdiction, all cops in the city have jurisdiction in the entire city, and the way the detectives in Manhattan are broken up for the most part is a south office and a north office, and they can really go wherever they like. But for the most part, the business district, which is City Hall South, is one detective. Overarching hierarchy, and then from City Hall North is another one. So he probably is a North detective, and so he would have been within his jurisdiction. Granted, he had no cause to pull over really the van, other than to try to stop the witness there. So I agree that it would not have been a bad tactic to put his PI on the stand, in order to, kind of flush that out if he was going through that particular strategy.
Gabby, you raised some interesting issues with Mayor Fisk and conflicts of interest. Can you walk us through the issue of, say, in this case, he is a convicted felon who's now mayor of New York and still might be running a crime family. So can you help us understand what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's been fascinating for me because it's like, you have the legal side on one side, and then obviously the kind of government, and all the kind of laws and regulations that govern that Having worked in state government, that's very exciting to see staff people, right? And seeing very, just like we've been talking about the realism of the courtroom procedure, sometimes not as realistic, right? But there is a lot of realism in how the office of the mayor operates, right? That tracks with things we would see in state government, municipal government, that sort of thing. And one of the big things that oversees um, any branch of government from the local, state level, federal level, are conflict of interest regulations or laws, code of ethics, that sort of thing. And one of the major things that you can't do, which seems common sense, but it is codified in law, is you really cannot use your position for personal financial benefit, right? It's common sense, but you would be violating the law if you did that. So in New York City, it's governed by the New York City Charter, Chapter 68, which governs conflicts of interest. And there's a whole host of conflicts of interest that arise for municipal officers. And I should also note, very key here, is not just public servants, right? The elected officials themselves, but also the people who work for them, right? This individual that's working for Fisk or Vanessa, right, who goes and visits the crime families. But also Vanessa herself is subject to the conflicts of interest policies. She is what is called an associated person, right? She is the spouse of the elected official. And we get some reference to this, right? His staff person, who I'm imagining the woman who works for him is his chief of staff. This other shady character, right? It might be what we call like a body man versus a chief of staff, because he's, doesn't seem to have as much kind of direction in the office. He could have some other title. But basically, conflicts of interest would prevent them. You cannot misuse the office. You can't misuse city resources. So if this individual drove his city vehicle to this meeting with the crime families, that would not be allowed. And what they discuss is Vanessa running, even though Fisk seems to have taken a very separated position from the crime organization. Vanessa, obviously, and this is the subject of their spousal, kind of issues, is in therapy, is that she still wants to and may still be running the crime syndicate, right? And so she has to also take a step back because she's subject to the same kind of conflict of interest policies, because there's going to be certain things that she knows as the spouse of a mayor. She can't violate those confidentialities. She can't use that information for her own gain. There could be a solution, if you will, if they put and obviously this wouldn't necessarily be allowed because we're talking about a crime syndicate, but if there were a conflict of interest, say a business that was on the up and up, that they could put in what they call a blind trust, which neither Vanessa nor Fisk would have to have access to. It would have to be with somebody who was an independent trustee. They could put those assets that would potentially cause a conflict of interest, could put them in a blind trust, which would negate the conflict of interest while they were in office. But obviously, we're talking about a crime organization and washing money and all of that. And even Fisk knowing about what's happening could cause him problems down the line.
Yeah, putting a criminal operation to a blind trust seems to not make a lot of sense because the entire purpose is being criminal. So it's casual morals at best at that point. So it is super, super weird. But your insight from your state government days is super helpful to understand. So with all of that said, we get to the end of this episode, and if I was advising someone who had been a costume vigilante superhero type and they'd been outed, uh, and that involved the death of a police officer. I would say now is a great time to move to Lincoln, Nebraska, or Ann Arbor, Michigan, or Albuquerque. It's time to go and not come back. And don't leave a forwarding address. It's time to go. Hector doesn't do that. And in fact, he suits up again to go out and ends up getting shot through the head. And in the end is rolling credits is very haunting with the sound of the frog from Puerto Rico that he talked about. And the assailant has a Punisher logo on his chest. I don't think it's Frank Castle. I think law enforcement is taking up summary executions, which is a reason why we'll see Frank Castle in the series later. But yeah, I think he needed to move and not come back. It's time for a new identity in a new state, far away from New York City. I want to get first, Chris, your thoughts on it's time to move.
Oh, he should have been out of there. You should have gotten him and his family plane tickets, bus tickets, what have you, out the city. That should have been your first move. Honestly, I didn't think he was going to make it past the courtrooms or the courthouse steps. I thought he was going to be walking out. People were going to be, doing, reporters were going to be there. He's going to be walking down the steps to be like, Matt said something and pow. Thought that was just gonna be it. But the fact that he went back out in costume, and I don't understand as Matt how you do not expect him to do this. Because think about how long for you, Matt, it took for you to throw off the costume for good, and for Matt not to just be there and be like, "What are you doing? Go back inside." And honestly, I think wouldn't that spark an investigation by the state bar? Is like your actions deliberately led to this man's death. And given the potential, confidentiality issues raised that we've raised already, I feel like that would be something.
Very interesting question. Your Honor, do you have thoughts on what Chris has raised?
Yeah, I agree that the death definitely, I think, would raise some ethical issues in as much as it's clear that the revealing of his identity in that courtroom probably was the reason for the hit. And clearly, the White Tiger should have been on the next plane out to Puerto Rico so he can listen one last time to the coqui frog, and disappear into the rainforest for a little time. I think in the comic book world, his younger sister and or his niece take up the mantle of the White Tiger. It'll be interesting to see if the show does a White Tiger type of show, which would highlight a younger Latina superhero, which could be an interesting show in and of itself. So maybe we'll see a White Tiger show down the line with his younger sister or with his niece. And I also agree that it wasn't Frank Castro at the end, that this was probably a police officer who is taken over the Punisher logo, as is on many police officer vehicles within the city of New York, and became popular with the Blue Lives Matter answer to Black Lives Matter. So the Punisher has gained a bit of popularity amongst the NYPD, and I think that this was probably someone either at the behest of the Kingpin, or was someone that just believes to take out all the vigilantes.
Yeah, it's dark. Gabby, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chris. That was my feeling as soon as he was acquitted. I was like, his days are numbered. I thought he was definitely gonna get killed walking out of that courtroom. But it's sad. I hate, I don't even want to call it a trope because it's not a trope, but when an actor dies in real life and then they're viciously killed off, and that's kind of their ending, right? You have like a Ray Stevenson who's not killed yet, but obviously passed. But when you have that kind of violent end and then the person dies and they don't get, like, it's very sad to me. But I agree. I think, we're talking about kind of the ethical violations that Matt did, revealing his identity. And I think one thing he didn't take into account, again, we talked about how revealing the information put the lives of Hector Ayala's, family, friends, but it also kind of violated his own ability to stay in place, right? Not just this kind of cultural piece of being the white tiger, but he has every right to stay in New York, right? To stay where he lives, right? That decision to unmask him upended his life. And as we said, he should have, for all intents and purposes, been on the next, plane, bus, train out of New York City. But he shouldn't have had to, right? But Matt took this step that put his privacy at risk and, violated something much deeper because it has this kind of deeper connection that I don't think Matt took into account.
Yeah, lots of questions and lots of problems with this. Did I mean crossing Disney properties? Ray Stevenson's character from Ahsoka has been recast with Rory McCann, at least reportedly. Did the actor who played White Tiger die and I missed that?
Yeah, so that was the dedication at the beginning of episode 2. He unfortunately died battle of cancer that I believe he was dealing with while shooting Daredevil,
Mhm.
which is why he looks the way he does. So he did pass after he had filmed the scenes, I believe at the end of last year, if not the beginning of this year.
I
That's
think
horrible.
it was at the end of 2023, maybe. Um, because I know I looked that up afterwards, because I was like, who is this dedicated to? And yeah, well, now all the articles are about, oh, his character died and not when he died.
That's troubling on all kinds of levels. Because if they added that after the actor passed, I find that troubling on all kinds of levels. If that was part of the story to begin with, I don't have a problem with it. And in dedicating the story to him is appropriate in either situation because he does a great performance, especially if he was fighting cancer while filming.
Yeah, it was the end of 2023 that he passed.
So this was
Yeah,
filmed a while ago.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I
so
I
wonder if this was a part of the first sort of few episodes, because it went through extensive reshoots, because people did not like the direction of the first, you know
Yeah, he
the
died
first go around.
on Christmas Eve,
Ugh.
2023, December
Mhm.
24th, 2023. So it was right at the end of 2023. So it was probably right after some of the filming, and then they had to do some refilming depending on the storyline.
I think that would overlap with the writer's strike and the other strikes that took place. Oh, that just
Yeah, I would imagine that was always planned. Like, Chris and I said his days were numbered walking out of that courtroom. But it is just tragic to kind of line that up with somebody who did die tragically. Right. So it does make it all the more tough. Um, but yeah, it's interesting because, as you said, it's part of it's. I find it's interesting to determine what's been reshoots and what's been part of the original storyline.
that's a lot to take in and a lot to like my opinion would be very fact specific on knowing what happened, and I don't know how I feel about that yet. Well, all of that aside, what I do feel good about is they're doing an amazing job with this series. The depiction of lawyers are overall positive. That the courtroom scenes uh, aren't the like get up and scream at the TV. Like they're realistic looking enough, even if it is a weekend. Who's been charged a week ago, and we're doing this. What? Um, it's like the Punisher trial in season two taking like a week. Uh, that that's not how courtrooms work. But the arguments and everything seem plausible. So, uh, with that said, any closing thoughts from all of you, and we'll go in reverse order. Chris, any closing thoughts?
I thought this, I think I've said before, this was very rushed. But obviously they got somewhere they got to go. And so they're just like, we have no time for a proper murder trial. But I did think it was interesting that what they included, I feel like it is definitely going to play a part later on in the series, whether that's the cop that is still alive, may be the one in the Punisher's, vest, or maybe there are a bunch of them, and they'll get their comeuppance, whether, like Judge Serino said, that the district attorney was put in power by Fisk, so that will come to play later on. And definitely like that closing argument, maybe the theme of this is, heroes don't wear masks. But gave us some good content for today to talk about. So, and it's not like um Law and Order where they, make all defense attorneys look like the scum of the earth. So, a win is a win.
Yes. Yes, good thought. Gabby, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, like I said, I love the seeing both, obviously not just the lawyer, the legal field and, the lawyer drama and all that kind of stuff. And I agree, it's nice to see a defense attorney be the good guy for once. Um, but also, like I said, seeing all the kind of elected official, what's happening in the kind of municipal government world, which I hope they show a bit more of, is going to be really interesting. Obviously, you have Gandolfini as the kind of very sketchy aide to the mayor, right? That he may not be totally on the up and up as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that all part of the drama plays out as well. So I'm excited for that.
And your honor, your closing thoughts.
Very good legal advisors, whoever's helping with regards to these shows. The fact that we have good issues to discuss is a very good thing because it shows that they're also probably considering some of these issues when they decide the way that the story is going to go. And likewise, I like to see a defense attorney portrayed in a nice light. I had the privilege of having many, many wonderful, wonderful defense attorneys appear in front of me, and I happen to be very pro defense attorney with regards to what they do on any given day is not the easiest thing to do. And there are many, many, many great prosecutors that also came in front of me on any given day. Um, and I like things that portray the criminal justice system and show both the the warts as well as the virtues of the criminal justice system because it does have both. And the fact that people will discuss some of the things that happen in the criminal justice system is always a good thing because it's those kind of things that help reform the criminal justice system. Even if it's a little show like Daredevil, it still gets people discussing certain things.
Oh, and at the risk of sounding like an Eddie Haskell, the judge is depicted well.
Yes, I like that judge a lot. He was very realistic,
Hmm.
including him being very mad after putting his because I've been in that situation where I've kind of stuck my neck out to make a particular ruling, and then something happens which made me regret that particular decision. So I understood where that judge was coming from, and it was very realistically portrayed.
Yeah, it's just having done CMCs many times for case management conference, for those who don't know their abbreviation, it's nice seeing like that seems like a real judge. I'm glad to see that who's fair and normal sounding, as opposed to other depictions. So all good stuff. So with that, I can now say we will be at WonderCon on March 28th at 4 p.m. for Yar, the Pirates of Star Wars. Or I'll say it correctly, Yar, the Pirates of Star Wars. Super excited. I've been rewatching a lot of the animated series and Skeleton Crew. One of the other lawyers texted me today and said, who hadn't watched Bad Batch yet, and went, "This is awesome. It's like Clone Wars with seals." And it's just like, yes, it's a fantastic show. I understand you might accidentally watch all three seasons because there's lots of pirates in every Star Wars series. And we'll get to talk about pirates and can't wait. And for those going to Star Wars Celebration in Tokyo, at least Chris and I will be there, and there'll be two other legal geeks there as well. So if you're going to Tokyo, say hi. We're going to try to coordinate, and uh, I can't wait. My grandfather went to Japan 3 times. They hosted Japanese exchange students when I was young. Can't wait to go and see everything. So it should be a wonderful time with a bunch of Star Wars fans going to go right before Andor comes out. So with that, everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky. Take care now.